This is Coach DJ, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
We have with us tonight on the Break It Down Show, Fred Leland. Fred Leland is a trainer with more than 28 years of experience teaching law enforcement and security professionals, also military professionals. He's the founder and principal trainer of LESC, that's Law Enforcement and Security Consulting. In addition to that work, Fred Leland happens to be an active lieutenant with the Walpole, Mass. Police Department. And he's previously worked as a deputy with the Charlotte County, Florida Sheriff's Department. And before that, spent 6 years serving our country as a Marine, as a squad leader in Beirut, Lebanon. The courses that he teach include things like handling dynamic encounters, threat assessment, nonverbal communications, decision-making under pressure, evolving threats, violence prevention, and use of force. So with us tonight, we're going to talk about a lot of those topics and a lot of the things that are plaguing police forces now, what we can do about them, and hopefully give some of our listeners some insight into the challenges on a deeper level that everybody who wears a badge and serves their community go through on a daily basis. So thanks for joining us, Fred.
Well, thanks for having me, Pete and John. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you on. So, Fred, can you give us kind of a breakdown? When did you start the LESC training, and how has it gone, and where are you trying to take it?
Well, believe it or not, I started unofficially probably about 16 years ago, and then officially made it a legal business in 2006. And my whole goal was to try to develop training for police and security professionals that centered on making better decision makers, which is really the main focus of everything that I do. And as far as where I want to take it is a lot of the things I do center on police work. Luckily, I've had the opportunity to speak across the country. A lot of folks here in Massachusetts, where I happen to work, I do about 1,200 offices a year here, and then various conferences and things throughout the country on different times of the year, bringing some of this information. It's all about trying to transition police officers really from we're really policy and procedure driven. We have been for years, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. And I really believe that that's part of our problem when it comes to some of these problems we're seeing in the news today, like Ferguson and in New York City and the Cleveland, Ohio, when it comes to use of force and other adaptive challenges. We're trying to drive everybody with checklists to follow with adaptive issues that we really need to have free-thinking individuals who can come up and solve problems that require real-time thinking. And we don't do enough of that type of training. Policies and procedures are really great for technical related issues that we do in policing, like following and processing a crime scene or how you're going to wear your uniform, etc. But with adaptive challenges, we really need individuals who know their job and know it well, are capable of going out and putting a course of action together on the fly. And they end up having, go ahead.
The thing that I would really like to know when it comes to the recruiting process for new officers, how much of that dependency on personality, on the inherent traits of the individual you're bringing onto the police force, how much of what you expect out of an officer is talent and how much is training? Because it seems like, those two things are what separate good companies from less good companies, and that should be no different in policing. So how much is it that you depend on police forces to attract quality talent, and then assuming they attract the talent of a dedicated officer who's sort of middle of the road in terms of basic intelligence, just to throw something like that general out there. If they're getting middle of the road guys, how effective is it, or how much of their dependence on creating a great police force is dependent on the training that you would deliver or that they offer their officers in general?
Well, obviously, I think we've in policing have evolved in our way of looking for talented individuals. I mean, education has changed over the years, and we have a lot more highly educated individuals that we've gotten on police departments. We do more extensive background investigations and psychological testing and so on and so forth. So we make efforts there. I do believe that training is a big piece of it. Education is one piece of the equation. I think one of the things we've done in law enforcement is we put too much weight on that. I think we think if a guy has a piece of paper that says he has a certain degree, and I have, but the reality of it is that's not all it takes. You have to train guys appropriately, and I think that's really where we're lacking. And Massachusetts has a pretty good recruit training academy, probably one of the longest in the country, and that's super. But that's really just given these young police officers just really a basic understanding of what they need to know. They come out, they get another 12 weeks with a field training officer who's a veteran officer who takes them out and runs them through the mill as they go on calls together and tries to take what he knows learn from the academy, and now is he able to apply it on the street. But I do think there has to be a good combination of what you're talking about. There has to be some talent already there and some people who have not only the intellect, but also the emotional and social intelligence. And that's an area I don't think we focus in on an emotional IQ, if you will. And I think that's a big area we either should be focusing on early in the hiring process, or at least in the academy stage, start developing these guys so they understand, so that they become more self-aware about what their strengths and weaknesses are, and are able to adapt and evolve into a more calmer, focused individual while they're out on the street. Because they do deal with pressure situations, and to be quite frank with you, in most places they tell guys to control situations, and that word control means different things to different people, when we really should be focusing on teaching guys how to shape situations, not necessarily control them. And hopefully that helps answer your question.
It does, and I appreciate that type of answer and the insight that you bring to it. But I want to get back to the recruiting process. But first I want to ask you this, because I've been not in law enforcement, but in a corporate setting, in those trainings that they bring you into, where they do a personality assessment, they do, various assessments to establish a baseline in a group, and then they give you the, steps to understand a situation and how to use your term, how to shape the situation and steer it in your favor. And a lot of times I would sit with my colleagues and we would go, oh shit, we got to do another one of these damn things.
Damn it.
And we'd bitch and moan about it. So how much of that kind of resistance, never mind the first, the initial, you got to get your foot in the door at a department and establish the value to the executives and whether it's the chief or whomever he delegates to, establish the value of your training to come in and help guys get better. And then you get there and you start the training. When you're looking around at the faces of the officers, how many grizzled old veterans are looking back at you like, Jesus, man, come on. I've been on the street for 20 years. I know all this stuff. And then how many of the younger guys are like, you old bastard, you don't know what it's like anymore.
I think there is a lot of that, and it depends upon the training that you're bringing. And I think if you look recently, you see the New York PD, NYPD just did a training thing. It was all over the news about how they spent $35 million on a training thing that had 22,000 of their patrol officers go through it to try to make them more tactful in dealing with people. And they came up with the reports. The news reports talked about things like giving guys breath mints if they wanted to curse. I happen to say, man, if I had to have breath mints for every time I curse, I need about a case a week. But anyway,
your farts would smell like Altoids.
Yeah.
Oh God Almighty!
Fart Altoids. They just come out like a machine gun.
Yeah, and it's I understand what they were trying to do. Another thing was breathing. I mean, we breathe to try to remain calm, and combat style breathing's been talked about both in policing and the military. If you're in a bad situation, learn how to breathe. But they made this, according to the reports, a comment about closing your eyes if you're in a hostile situation and taking a deep breath. And we all know you don't have to be a police officer to know if you close your eyes in a hostile situation, bad things can happen. And one of the best things out of that whole report I read was they used the Patrick Swayze movie Roadhouse and the whole Be Nice theme, that scene from the movie where he goes in and he talks to his bouncers about I want you to be nice, and the guys get into discussing why and so on and so forth. He said, really, the bottom line is this: be nice until it's time not to be nice. And what the gist of that whole metaphor and the video was, in my mind, for is to show guys how to be both tactful and tactical at the same time, because communication skills, if you look at the strategic game of interaction, when you're dealing with people, it's to help you learn something. And if you don't have good social skills as a police officer, you're missing something when it comes to tactics, because tactics and how you speak and communicate with people, how you listen, and how you communicate verbally and non-verbally is huge in learning on the fly. And I don't think we spend enough time in policing teaching police officers that side of it. But to go back to your question, do we have those crusty old guys? And yes, it depends on the training. If it's a PowerPoint presentation and it's just, I could have sent it to your email and you could have read it and learned as much as me just reciting it, then you're going to have that look. If it's something that's involving in teaching guys how to think and instead of telling them what to think, then obviously you're going to have a big difference in how people feel about it. I do a lot of tactical decision-related games or decision-making exercises. Some people have a problem with the word game in an official training program, but that's we can talk about that later, how formalities kind of cause some of our problems too. But the reality is if you're giving guys exercises and they have to problem solve in a class, they're more involved, they're more engaged, they're actually coming up with answers on their own, and they start to build confidence in their abilities, become better decision makers, and they retain more information. But if the training is, again, rote memorization with a multiple guess exam, and that's how they sit and listen to somebody talk, they're going to be bitter, and I've seen it. I've seen that type of training, and guys are like, here we go again. It's just repeat of last time, and it's just repeated topics over and over again. And you know how the so-called the cone of learning goes. 10% of what you read, you remember after only a couple of weeks. 20% of what you hear in words, 30% of what you look at in pictures, 50% of what, if you watch a movie or listen to a visual recording, and then 70% of what we individually say. So if you're a trainer getting up teaching, you remember a lot more probably than your student who's sitting there listening to you, who you're trying to teach. And then obviously the claim is 90% if you have people doing and solving the problems themselves. And that's really what I think we need to really go with our training. We don't do enough of that. We have stages that we in policing tend to focus on developing guys individually. We teach them the law. Then we teach them, let's maybe domestic violence dynamics. Then we teach them how to use a baton. Then we teach them how to use OC spray. Then we teach them how to use a taser and then a firearm. And it's all done separately, and there's no blending of the training. Fred,
taking it to the firearm thing and going back to the nonverbal communication, when I get pulled over, and this is as a combat veteran, as someone who knows what it's like to have to be on alert. You guys are trained to do certain things. When you augment that training, you're trying to create that how do I think thing. So I get pulled over. I'm going to pull over in a spot where I'm visible, where the cop can see me, I can see him, and as safe as I can make it. Even if I have to drive another half mile, I'm going to drive to a spot where I feel safe. I'm going to put my hands on top of the wheel, non-verbally communicating, I want you to go home,
Yeah.
And I look to see where their hand is, because if, just like with combat troops, if I look where their hands are all the time. If their hands are calm and steady, it's going to be on a rifle in a combat situation, but that officer, if he's got his hand on the butt of that pistol, I know that I have got to communicate to him. It's my responsibility. If I want to keep myself out of trouble, I've got to be calm, let him know everything along the way. Every step, I'm going to put my hand in the glove compartment. Is that okay? That's where my registration is. That nonverbal communication, I've learned that even though I put that signal out, I'm going to add regular spoken communication to make sure that officer is receiving the message. Do you guys do similar stuff from that point of view where yes, you're broadcasting out some kind of message as an officer, but that doesn't mean it's being received?
Exactly. Where we do focus on it is on watching others. But I don't think we focus enough. Maybe I was just having this conversation this afternoon. I don't think we as police officers focus enough on our own body language, our own verbal and non-verbal. And I think both sides are important because obviously that interaction is two-way. And sometimes I think as police officers, we lose sight of individual you're dealing with has a say in this game, especially if it's well, in any situation, but especially if it's something that might turn violent, and everybody has a say in it. It's very important. Now, to take what you're talking about, the hands on the wheel and all those types of things, an interesting study done by Force Science Research which is a group of people out of Mankato University who do a lot of studies on police and movements and how they operate. There's an interesting stat on hands. We teach recruits in the academy to watch what we call deadly hands from the get-go. We teach them that. We tell them, you got to keep an eye on hands, got to keep an eye on hands. They'll give them an exam with multiple guess questions, and they'll all get it right. They'll get the answer right. But the study that these guys did said that they ran them through traffic stops, and they said that 66% of the officers who went through that training never looked at the hands. Never even looked at them. So we got problems with information, with knowledge not being applied.
Right.
And that's problematic. That's really problematic to police, because if they go up and they don't notice those types of things, don't watch hands, the basic concept, one of the basic things of nonverbal, watch those hands, because those are the things that can harm you with weapons. And they're not doing that. We're really missing something. And this is part of this whole lecture versus experiential learning techniques. It makes a big difference in how we do it.
Well, it's funny that Pete brings this up and he gives that example the way that he did. He and I have had this conversation before. I am not a combat veteran, but I lived in a shitty neighborhood where cops had to be assholes. I mean, on guard and watch themselves all the time. But the reputation that created was, especially among disaffected young people, of which I was probably associating. And we had to, it was an adversarial relationship in large part with some of the cops. Some of them were okay. Their reputations preceded them, but, there was an adversarial way of thinking when I was a much younger man. Part of that, though, developed my ability to not be treated in ways that I didn't want to be treated. And that involved really every single one of those things that Pete mentioned. Hands on the wheel. I am brown. And in that neighborhood, when I know I got racially profiled. So I had to operate in the other direction, smile a lot. Hey, how you doing, officer? Hands on the wheel. Allow him to understand that I don't, if you're going to look at my hands, that's great, but I'm going to show them to you. I'm going to put them right here. I'm going to tell you that I'm reaching very slowly to my glove compartment where my registration is, and I'm going to do that right now. And as I do that, don't do anything, all of that shit. I learned that out of necessity, just like Pete did. It was just a different kind of necessity. Now, part of that, though, comes from the fact that I was raised by a very reasonable man, and he taught me some manners. How do we get the message of policing out externally so that people in the public, because I looked at my contemporaries at that time and they just were those, they were the kids who didn't give a shit. I hate these damn cops. I don't need to show him my hands. Fuck him. That was the attitude. Yep. Now, where do we bridge the gap, and how do we get police officers to say, hey, I'm just trying to do my job, man. I'm not trying to harass you, but help me out.
There's two sides of the coin, obviously. There's the police side of the coin, and obviously there's the public side. One of the big things we need to do is to have real solid information that put out there, and we don't get enough of that. We get media information. They're reporting a certain set of circumstances that makes it look like something's more. Police use deadly force. Let's talk about deadly force. They use deadly force in 0.00012% of all their contacts. There's a recent study. It's actually called, so you can find it online. It's called Examining the Prevalence of Deaths from Police Use of Force. It was written, just recently came out of the University of Toledo by a guy named Richard Johnson, who's part of their whole criminal justice program out there. And he did some interesting stats, and I'm going to read a piece of it from you here. It says it's basically over public concerns for community reactions to 3 deaths of African American males by police. He wanted to answer some key questions, and I'll go through them real quick. It says, how many deaths occur annually from police use of force? How does the frequency of deaths from police use of force compare to other forms of homicide, suicide, and other unusual events? How many deaths of black men occur annually from police use of force? How does the frequency of black male deaths from police use of force compare to other forms of homicide, suicide, and other unusual events. And then the last question, the fifth one, was how often should police legitimately be using force? And what he did is he took the stats from the uniform crime reports that the data consisted of like 56,000 homicides that were discovered between January of 2009 and December 31st, 2012, so over a 4-year period. He compared them to other causes of death, like through the Center of Disease Control and also through the National Weather Service, which to me was interesting when I first saw it. He says out of the 56,259 homicides total in the country in that time frame, 1,491 were a result of police use of force. And he compared them to things like in the same time period, the 755 result of negligent accidental homicide, 1,120 justifiable homicide by citizens acting in self-defense, and then 52,893 criminal homicides.
Slow down. Wait,
Hold on. Holy shit.
Yeah, let that number sit. Say that number again. The cops versus criminal homicide.
Well, there was, out of that total number was a 1,491 result of police use of force, and the criminal homicides were 52,893. That's a big
1,400 versus 52,000.
Yes.
That bunch of assholes I was hanging out with when we were going, fuck those cops. That bunch of assholes
now
was 50 times more likely to be one of the guys who might kill me.
He's got this info in here too. It's fascinating. Here's what it says. This suggested a yearly average, right, of 372 persons killed each year by police use of force. That's, 372, that's a lot of people. All right? But here's the interesting thing. In the same time frame,
in what population size is that 372?
330 million?
This is right.
That's in the United States?
Yeah, whole United States.
In the United States.
372.
Yes. And that doesn't include tourists that are always here all the time, I mean,
it includes, a population, but it goes into, this is the interesting one that really nailed me, because this is what people need to understand how rare. And I teach use of force. I knew it was rare, but I had no idea it was this rare. He says, 372 persons killed each year by police use of force. Here's a couple more stats. 35,900 persons killed each year in the U.S. in motor vehicle accidents. 38,364 persons commit suicide each year. Now hear this last one. 373 persons are struck by lightning in the U.S. each year.
More people by one.
Wow.
By one. There's more people struck by lightning than are killed by police. So there's one place we can start. That
number too, just to hold on to that number, the difference is gigantic. I mean, 50 times more likely to be shot by someone with criminal intent. Here's the other thing. Mm-hmm. It may not be true all the time for those police officer use of force deaths, but there should be some sort of escalation of force where that person assesses something and ultimately are given no choice but to use lethal force. You and I both know, from the military side, from the police side, you don't just start by shooting someone in the face.
No, exactly.
It might happen in some of those occasions, but you're supposed to go 1 to 5 and escalate. You can skip 1 all the way to 5 instantly. Mm-hmm. But a thug doesn't have that rule.
Well, but let me say this. There's 300 so flabbergasted by this number that, refresh my memory, it's 372?
Yes. Police use of force deaths. Yes.
Police use of force deaths. Now, that's not to say that there are 372 police use of force deaths that the public gets pissed off about.
Right. No, exactly.
Some of those guys are guns blazing, shooting at police officers in the midst of a bank robbery, and pardon my being cavalier, but got it coming.
Yes, absolutely. They don't get mad about all of them. No, they don't.
So of all the doors battering rammed in or kicked in during a drug bust and all the SWAT team activity that's out there, the police only still kill 372 people a year.
Yes. Yes. That's a fair statement, a fair way of putting it. And that's according to this recent study. And
I'm not going to let this interview be over, Fred, but I'm just going to say, I was really going to approach this interview as the token brown guy who has a problem with the way that police treat minorities or the perception of such. And this is not just coming from what I hear in the media, but, I experienced it a little growing up. Right. I experienced the other thing too, and I'll talk about that. But honestly, to say that there are police use of force deaths that number 372 a year versus the 300 million people that live in this country and all the bad people doing bad shit.
Here's another stat that he breaks down. Out of the 1491 persons that died from the use of force from that 4-year period.
Yeah.
Here's another number. 915, 61.4% were white males. 481, 32.2% were black.
Wow.
You don't hear those numbers.
You really don't hear those numbers.
Yeah, that's not reported.
We don't. And here's the thing I wanted to get into here is that's the major thing. Right information. Legitimate information coming out of universities doing studies and the academic world, which, I'm not a huge fan of, but at the same time, these are the guys that have the capabilities and the people to be able to do these studies, and they seem to be unbiased as they do them. That's one thing. But to go back to what you guys are saying in the experience in the real world, I think that what we don't focus enough on in the police world is we focus on the physical side of it, controlling the bad guy, getting them in handcuffs, or if it's a deadly force situation, shooting, or if it's a force situation, struggling with them. We've all seen those on television. And we focus on the physical, but we don't spend enough time focusing on the mental and moral aspects of the game, especially the moral. We can win these individual battles, but then we lose the public trust.
Right.
Because of the lack of perception. And because of, on the police side, because we're so CYA oriented, cover your ass oriented, over the last several decades, we've become so policy and procedure driven. And what are they for? It's put out, yes, it can help us do things better, but the real reason for policies and procedures is so we can go back and look at the paperwork and say later on that, look, these things were in effect and this isn't the police department's fault or the community's fault. So we spend a lot of time focused on that CYA. And my question always is, well, if we're so focused on CYA, how are we going to be able to help people?
Right.
Right. And win over the moral side that we need to win. In other words, win the community trust that we need. And you're going to have a difficult time doing that if you're not going to be transparent. I use this example since Ferguson. I talked to police officers. I said, let me ask you a question. I said to policemen, I said, if your brother or a loved one of yours was killed in my town and you called me up and I said, I can't say anything until the investigation's over, are you going to be happy with that?
No.
And they're not going to be. They all look at me and go, I wouldn't be. I go, so then why are we doing that to people? We need to come up with a way of being able to give them information without so-called giving up the case. In other words, jeopardizing the case.
Right. Compromising the investigation.
Exactly. So there's ways of doing that. It's just a matter of giving out basic information. And I think we should be doing more of that and spending more time to do that. That could help. I'm not saying it's going to prevent everything because emotions are going to be strong, obviously. But at least if people feel like people are being transparent and telling them things about what happened, because when you say I got no comment, it looks like a cover-up.
Yeah.
It's just automatic. I don't care if it isn't. Yeah. It just looks like it is.
No comment is commentary on what's going on for a lot of people. Absolutely.
It is. It's automatic, and that doesn't help us.
And aside from the emotional reaction of being upset that you didn't get an answer, it is, like Pete said, no comment is commentary. It stinks.
It does.
The other emotion is that you're hiding something.
You've got it 100%. And that's how it looks even. And as well as I do, perception is powerful. It doesn't have to be true.
Yeah.
It just has to be believed.
Perception is true. I mean, that's
it is somebody's reality.
Yeah, it's their reality.
Exactly. Yeah. It's their reality.
That number, I'm still blown away by that. I did the math. And if you just go on population of the United States, that number of deaths is a 1/1,000,000th of a single percent. That's how ridiculous that number is.
Yeah. Fred, you said 0.00, the number you read off as a decimal was staggering. But to hear it as 1/1,000,000th, to hear it as a fraction that involves an M.
Yeah, I've never said that.
Yeah.
I'm glad one of you guys knows the math stuff because that's out of mine. But yeah, it's rare. It is rare.
Well, and the thing is so getting struck by lightning is a very lethal thing, and it's comparable as far as times per year in the statistical model you're giving there.
Yep.
But police officers are drawn to the most lethal situations. The thing in Ferguson gets out of hand, and that's uncommon. I would imagine that the way these people die, there's going to be some suicide by police type things in that mix. There's going to be a variety of things, but oh crap, something bad's happening, 911, come over here now, and an assailant dies. Most of the time is going to be my assumption. I don't have the numbers in front of me. You think about that too. Like, these guys are going to the worst possible situations.
If you like the show,
and you know you do,
send us some pictures of your movies.
Don't do that. Support the show.
There are 3 ways you can support us.
Number 1, go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And leave a 5-star rating and review.
It helps with the show metrics, and it helps us get better placement. Number 2,
visit our website,
www.breakitdownshow.com.
We've got an Amazon and an eBay link.
Same Amazon, same eBay, you know and love, but they give us a little kickback when you get to their site from ours. And number 3, leave comments about the shows that you like. We want to know what you think, how you feel.
Tell us how to make the show better. We greatly appreciate it.
Now back to the show.
We like boobies.
And that's the other thing, guys, is most of these circumstances aren't like a policeman patrolling and just saying, hey, let me go talk to this guy. Usually they're getting called to these calls or they recognize something that looks off. It's not like they're a bad guy driving down the street looking for somebody to hurt. They're on the job, and they go into these circumstances, and it turns out to be a deadly encounter. And it can go from nothing like the New York situation, untaxed cigarettes, to somebody in a struggle that somebody gets hurt. And one of the things we can't do when it comes to use of force is make it look pretty. There's no way of making it look nicer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean,
somebody gets hurt.
I tell guys all the time, I said, if you can develop an app for it where I can push the button and say, lock this to put them in handcuffs with no struggle, that'd be great, but it's just not reality. You know, when we use force, even if it's a verbal altercation, it doesn't look pretty. I always try to bring things home to people. I said, think about the arguments you've had at home with your spouse, with your loved one. Think about how ugly some of those have been and how embarrassed you would be if people knew about them. And usually people go, yeah. Because you can't make those types of conflicts look good. They're ugly, they're hurtful, they spark emotion. When emotions go up, good common sense and decision making go down. And that's why it's important for cops to learn how to control their emotions to the best of their ability. And when people do get emotional and don't cooperate, to go back with what John was saying, cooperating with the police makes a big difference because it makes things go smooth and you can make your argument in court. But there seems to be a little bit of a change in that because of the climate that's out there now. In fairness, another topic that's been big in the news is this whole idea of police militarization, which has been all over the news. And, cops that are taking SWAT teams to, $20 buy-in poker games, or the barber who doesn't have a license, those types of things. My philosophy is this. We need these tools to protect the homeland. There's no doubt about it. We need this stuff, but we need to be a little more cautious about where we use them and when we use them. We shouldn't be taking them out on everything. We should be taking them out for what they were really made for and using these teams for what they're really made for. It's sparingly. And what we've done in an effort to try to beef up the appearances is maybe we've used these tools too many times. And it's become, look at these guys, they're all out here, and it's almost like I don't want to overemphasize it, but for lack of a better way of putting it, it's almost like a standing army. Some people look at it.
You can legitimately, you call it a paramilitary force.
Right.
I mean, it's anybody who wants to call it that is right.
What's fascinating to me is it's not just a liberal thing versus it's both. All sides feel this way. There's cops who feel this way.
The use of MRAPs in a civilian setting. I've ridden in MRAPs. Those things are gigantic. You can only drive so fast in them because they absolutely will flip over. And the Army keeps very tight control. I mean, you're not supposed to go more than about 25 miles an hour in regular driving. You might get up to 35, but really at 35, you need to be very careful because you turn that thing and it's going to roll like a bucket. You start killing people and squishing property with your MRAP flipping side to side. That's bad.
Yeah. And there's some great research out there. I know Radley Balco, he wrote a book called Rise of the Warrior Cop. Police militarization in America. I recommend it to all cops, even though I know it's going to get them emotional.
Right.
Because they should read it, because we have evolved into this process where we're using these tools. And look, on one side of it, guys are looking at some of the things that have happened in the country, 9/11, the Boston bombing, other things that have happened here in the homeland, and they're thinking we need to have certain tools to be prepared. And to some extent that's true, but where do we draw the line?
I mean, I honestly think an MRAP is too much. It's like a 30-ton vehicle. It tears up the asphalt as soon as you put it on the thing. It destroys the civil property. And I can't think of a reason.
How many police forces have an MRAP?
You know what? The number I don't know, but let's just say these things have increased due to those programs that the federal government. You know, a cop's second favorite F word is free. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know what? I have to acknowledge in this conversation, my brother he's like a superhero. He repels from helicopters, one of those guys that we talk about, who's prepared. And in his job, he doesn't have to do it very often. I don't know that he's ever really had to do it, but he's a correction officer and he is the repel master.
Uh-huh.
So he does all of that stuff and he enjoys that part of the work. I'm glad that he knows all of that stuff and that he trains with all of those tools and that he has them at his disposal because I want his ass to get home too.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with being tactically over-prepared for the situation. But it goes back to your identifying the guy because my brother is, he's perfectly calm, rational guy. And
yes.
I'm glad that he's the one with the tools because those tools in the wrong person's hands could be, misused or even used with some neglect and bad things can happen. But I'm glad that they're there and I'm glad he's got them.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. They need them. But you're right. The right type of people need to be on these teams. There's no doubt about it. Because I call the yahoos, the guys who want to yell, scream, and, charge to everything in their path. They don't need to be on it. Sometimes we get the wrong guys on these teams. But the highly trained teams, SWAT teams, so everybody understands what we're talking about, they know this, and they're good at it. The problem we have in some places is maybe not so highly trained. You follow?
Yeah.
And that becomes problematic.
Right. So the problem isn't the tools. The problem isn't the MRAP necessarily, although that's a pretty extreme example. The problem is selection process and the training process for the guys who have these tools, and sometimes that's lacking.
Yeah, and where we use them. Right. Those two things and where and when we use them is crucial. I mean, if the Boston bombing takes place and there's an MRAP on the street because they realize they're looking for a terrorist, I think people would say, hey, we need it today. But if it's out floating around on the Pumpkin Festival, cruising the parade route or something, it just doesn't come out. In America, in our climate, in our culture in America, it just doesn't feel right.
If it tips over into the Charles because they park on the bank and the bank can't support the weight and 4 dudes die inside of it, all of a sudden they don't need an MRAP. Because those things are death boxes. They really are. I mean, they're designed to withstand IEDs. That's what they're built for. They're not built for community policing.
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, if we use them, like when SWAT teams were originally found after the Texas Tower incident, Charles Whitman back in the 60s.
Right.
And then LAPD put a SWAT team together to try to prevent or to mitigate bad situations like that. That's what it was put for. And initially, that's what it was used for. They were used for those types of serious things. They were called out on the extreme cases that us guys on patrol couldn't normally handle. Or it was too big for us, or we needed more specialized individuals and specialized tools, special weapons and tactics. That's what SWAT stands for. And it's kind of evolved into this thing now where they're all over the place. Because what's happened is a lot of small, like, we got a great team in this area, and it consists of, and these guys have come a long way training their guys, and they train around the country and practice, and they do super jobs and real call-outs. But it contains like 45, 48 towns. A part of this, they call it MetroLEC, the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council's emergency response team. And it consists of that SWAT component, but it also consists of a search and rescue and some other different investigative components to it. And they're called out, and they come to town, and they're very highly trained, and they'll say, hey, what do you need us to do? And depending on what we got going, we'll communicate, collaborate, and figure out how we want to handle something. A lot of times they'll back away and just be on standby. Or if they feel as though through communication that it's something they need to deal with, then obviously they'll set up the crisis negotiation teams or whatever it might be. And those kind of guys. But what's happened is we've taken like the big cities that used to have them. Now they're out and they're all over the place. Most of them are done in these, like I said, these consortiums of 40, 50 towns or sometimes smaller groups. But still, that means they're all over. And they're responding to seeing more and more of them. And a lot of times, guys, they want to get out and get the real direct experiences versus the indirect and training only.
Well, there you go. That's the problem, right? You have commanders that if you have a SWAT team, you have to use it. So now you have commanders that are compelled to use their SWAT team, and we're putting a lot of faith in these guys. And I gotta believe that the system requires them to go out. How do the commanders control that urge?
Again, it comes to the people. Like this particular team, I'll speak from personal experience with these guys. They know and they work on controlling themselves. They're constantly training. They constantly have conversations. I've had debates with them over it because obviously it's an emotional topic for cops, especially SWAT guys, because sometimes it's taken personally. But it's not about not needing these teams. These guys are highly trained, squared away guys, and that's what we need. But they're able to control their emotions. They're able to stay calm. That if you got those types of people, then your teams will be safe and your guys will go out on the right types of calls. But if you have sometimes, like you said, they got the team, they want to use it, and that's not a good enough reason.
Right.
There's got to be a strategic and tactical reason for me using these, or we shouldn't be using them. Bringing them out for everything just is not the way to do it. So it really comes down to the selection process, again, and big on people's attitudes and their mindset. And are they willing to, you got growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And I don't think you really need too many fixed mindsets on a SWAT team. You need guys that are willing to understand and learn every time they go out. And that's important.
Yeah, a learning organization is critical, and there's a lot to learn about being a learning organization. I want to back up and talk a little bit about those numbers were so impactful. It makes me think about the community policing aspect must really be paramount. I mean, if we're talking a couple hundred tragic deaths, of course, when the police are involved and someone dies, we're not minimizing that. But the problem can't be that it's police being racist if the bulk of them are white people. It's not this black model. That doesn't register with me if these are the numbers. But it doesn't eliminate the problem of a community, in this case the black community, rejecting the police. And that's on you guys. How do we figure out how to make the community accept that these numbers are fantastic? Look, our police force is not the German police force. If you get lippy with the German cop, he's going to wrap you on the beak with his stick. I've seen it. So many different police forces. He gets to. You don't get to complain about it, or you get wrapped again. You go into the station office and they'll smack you, Our police force is by and large excellent. Are there mistakes? Absolutely. Are there shitbags out there that are cops? Absolutely. But that isn't the problem. The problem is this disconnect between the police and society and how the perceptions are there. So what the heck do we do with that?
Well, what we need to do is, and I know this has been talked about for years, and and in places they're doing it, they're getting positive results. We need to get out and deal with the people that you serve. It's as simple as that. In the 70s, we jumped in cruisers and started this rapid response stuff, and it took us away from the people, and the only time people saw you is when you were on a call or pulling them over on a motor vehicle stop. That was part of the problem. We need to have more people engaged with the community, getting out of their vehicles, talking to people about whatever. I mean, like when Ferguson's going on, I go into a coffee shop and the stranger says, "Hey, how come you cops are shooting people like this?" And I said, "Sir, what do you mean?" And he says, "This Ferguson thing, this stuff's going on all the time. Why are you guys shooting everybody?" I said, "Look, I'm getting a cup of coffee. You want to sit down and talk with me for a few minutes?" He goes, "I got about 20 minutes. I'll sit with you." So I sat down and I talked to him about some of these numbers and some of the things that are going on. And in 25 minutes, I kind of reshaped his way of thinking about things based on some facts. And we don't do enough of that. And the same thing with relationships with people. If you get out and meet people, you get to know them. They know you're a human being. You're not just some guy in a uniform, that you're actually a guy they can approach and talk to, joke around with, even sit down and have some dinner with. And that's important. That side of the job is important, and it's still in a lot of places, despite all the talk of community policing, and still in a lot of places, it's just not there.
Cops like dinner?
Absolutely.
Hey, yeah. I'm going to tell a story, Fred, if you'll indulge me.
Yes, go ahead.
My very dear friend, Jerry Bull, is a retired Vallejo police officer. When I met him, he had met my brother many years ago. My brother and I were roommates, and he met my brother. My brother was going through the police academy, and Jerry was martial artist who was wanted to get his instructor certification, which meant taking a single student all the way through an entire martial arts system so that he could be certified at every belt. He decided that student was going to be my brother, and that was a great choice. My brother's he's a fine martial artist, and he's my little brother, but he's my teacher. But he was also a very, very diligent student. So when he started training with Jerry, I was, as his roommate, and I just wanted to hang out with him. So I said, well, I want to do it too. Can you talk to him and see if you can talk him into taking on 2 students? And at the time, he decided, yeah, I'd love to take on 2 students. He pulled us together and said, here's what I want. I am, he explained to us, the Vallejo Youth Services Officer. So if you were a kid in Vallejo, California, and you were getting in trouble, and there were a lot of those, you had to go through him because he was the guy who took every kid to juvenile hall. There was not a file that he didn't touch if it involved, a kid going to juvenile hall. He said, so many of these kids are good kids and they're just getting in trouble because they don't have anything to do. And so what I would like to do is I want to start a martial arts class that we teach at the community center, and I want to do it for free. And I need 3 certified instructors to do it, and I'll be one, but I want to make you 2 the other 2. And we thought we can probably stretch this out for a few months. We ended up doing it for 16 years, getting a lot of help from other adults like us. We had 26 earned black belts, and we positively influenced around 1,400 kids from every pocket of the community. I bring this up not to give Jerry some press, though I like to do that, but because there is community level service going on in the police ranks and community folks who embrace it and lend a hand, and tons of kids out there who are not troublemakers.
Wow. So this is, that's fascinating. Those are great results, and you see this type of thing more often that doesn't get mentioned. I can speak great from my own place here. I got guys here who will arrest a heroin addict tonight, be going over basically swinging by their house to talk to their wife and kids tomorrow, or trying to get them into some type of rehab. And spent, just last week I had a guy spend 6 hours trying to get heroin addict some help. And as he finally got the help for the heroin addict disappeared and went in and got high, and then finally called him back and apologized to him.
Wow.
But my point is, 4 hours of his own time while he was with his kids.
You know what? I bring that up, though, because not to give Jerry some press, although I do want to do that. I always want to do that. But because there are plenty of dedicated guys like him who do exactly as we're describing, police within the community.
Absolutely.
And those guys become in their community trusted guys. And when you're getting in trouble, a lot of the reaction that a kid has when he's getting in trouble is just, you're scared because you don't know how to deal with that. And if there's a voice of calm and a voice of familiarity who can say, yeah, you're in trouble. Now let's see what you have to do to get yourself pulled together and make something out of this and try and scrape together a solution.
And that's all about having the right strategy and then utilizing the right tools for everything that you do. Policing's a really interesting, like I say, business, for lack of a better way of putting, profession.
Yeah.
And it's interesting in the sense that you're out here. Most people you talk to will tell you they get in this business to try to help people. And they do. But sometimes a lot of the job ends up making some guys cynical. And you have to work at not being cynical. And I always tell people, look, 90% of this job's positive. But it's like the old adage, the negative is more powerful than the positive for whatever reason, right? You seem to focus in on the negative side of the business when 90% of it's positive. You're saving lives, delivering babies, helping people in their time of need for a host of different things. All kinds of quality of life related issues is 90% of it.
Helping a lot of people avoid their time of need altogether.
Exactly. And the reality is this, depending on where you work, 3 to 5% of your job is arresting bad guys and writing tickets.
Right.
The other 90 some odd % is helping people in some way, shape or form. I think the media effect, and when I say media, I don't mean just the news, but I mean, I love a great Hollywood movie and, Training Day and all those great flicks, those police movies and police shows over the years. I have to always revamp my police shows though, because when I talk Starsky and Hutch and T.J. Hooker, these young kids don't know what I'm talking about anymore.
Let's go back to Angie Dickinson.
Angie Dickinson, exactly.
Yeah. We also like some Streets of San Francisco around here.
Streets of San Francisco, Police Story with Angie, all those flicks, they don't know what they are. But the reality of it is, when you got people out here doing these things and they understand how our strategy, operations, and tactics, and I don't mean just in the sense of the black suits and the helmets and the Velcro. I'm talking about everything we do, from how we help kids to everything throughout the community, the elderly, the mentally ill. We do all those things now. In Walpole, we formed a whole community crisis intervention team to help those people that are mentally ill, to try to keep them out of jail if jail isn't where they need to be. Obviously crime, and there's a bunch of factors we can consider, but we try to get them help first if we can. Those types of things go on. But we don't, in training, in a lot of organizations, we don't focus on anything but the end result all too often. And I'm not saying that in a sense that it's intentional, but sometimes we do what we know, and all we know is putting handcuffs on and bringing a guy in and not thinking about the moral implications. I'm a big Colonel John Boyd, military guy anyway, ought to understand Boyd and his ideas. I'm a big proponent of his thinking and trying to how it works here in police work. And that's another thing, is I actually call my website Law Enforcement Security Consulting. And now I'm at a proponent, I'm saying, man, you know what? We shouldn't really be calling ourselves law enforcement. We should be calling ourselves police, right? Because law enforcement's only a fraction of what we do.
Right.
All right? Police.
Now that you put it that way, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's only a fraction of what we do. It's, the words make a difference, and they certainly do. And how we look at things. A big thing is, we talked about earlier on, about going home at the end of the day. And that's always what we've been taught since day one. You want to go home. But we have to also weigh that with our job involves risk. Our only focus is to go home. Are we going to take the risk to go into that school? Are we going to take that risk to go deal with that guy in that side, that home where there's a violent domestic encounter or an armed robbery? So there's always calculated risk involved in this business. So you have to take that going home at the end of the night and weigh it and balance it with, hey, wait a minute, we have a duty to protect and serve.
Right.
So we have to look at those things. And most cops that I know do look at that. And there isn't any cop that I know who would not go in. But those things, sometimes we can focus so much on the warrior mindset and the safety, we forget that we really are guardians of the Constitution of this country. And that's what we need to be focused on.
Look, there's problems with the police force. We have entirely too many black people in jail, and I don't know how to fix all those problems. We've talked about the lethal end of it, not the day-to-day stuff that happens when the same dude gets arrested 50 times down in Hallandale, Florida. There are problems. There's no doubt about it. But you guys, like you said, 3% of your job, 5% is putting cuffs on people and some kind of intense conflict. And the numbers are incredible on the lethal activity, and yet you guys are striving to get even better at that. And that's commendable. You guys realize that this isn't good enough. We're going to do more to try to interact with the community. And a lot of that stuff's got to be on us as the community to take time to learn how to deal with an officer. Even when, you're pulled over, what do you do to reduce your situation?
It doesn't take that much time.
Yeah,
Keep your hands where people can see them. Smile a lot. Be nice.
I tell them, if every cop on the street took the opportunity to talk, some guys get offended. If somebody asks them, well, why are you guys shooting everybody in Ferguson, they get upset. And they end up in more of a conflict with a guy versus talk to him. But I go around talking to guys all over, and I tell them, look, you gotta talk to people. If they ask you a question, know your job and talk to them. And tell them why it's not the case. And explain things. There was a couple of protesters, I think Arizona, and I can't remember where the other guy was out of. They sent through a simunitions type training. They put them in use of force situations with sims.
I love the start of this story.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yes, they put them in to the scenarios, and they ran them through several scenarios. And when it was over, he went through both these guys went through, and they said, I got to go back and talk to my people. This is a lot harder than I thought. All right. And there's actually you'll find it online. I can't think of the name of them, but they're online, and it's interesting to watch them. And I give them a lot of credit because they had the character after all that to say, hey, we were wrong here. This is not easy. I have a whole different viewpoint. So if we did things like that with folks and ran them through scenarios so they had a little bit of an understanding of how police operate. I show a video to the group I just had 2 weeks ago, and a couple of people were completely horrified. It was a car stop that turned deadly for a police officer, and they were completely like, we had no idea you guys have to worry about these types of things.
Oh my goodness.
It's funny how you're kind of removed from it. And my whole point is education is one thing, training's another. So, I mean, but at least educating people and giving them the real information is a big start. And if we could kind of involve a little training, every community just did something every year where they educated folks, and then maybe if they had the opportunity, train them by running them through some of these little scenarios, you do a lot to win people over, especially in use of force. Other things we could do, I mean, it was a great article in the Washington Post on Ferguson shows how police force can turn into a plundering collection agency. You know, when people perceive that we're stopping cars to get revenue for the government, what do we got? They don't look at it like it's a traffic safety issue anymore. They look at it like all they're doing is collecting more money for the community. And that's not nice. That's not a good thing. And that's one of the big things that came out of that Ferguson report was they collected, and they're writing emails back and forth about how they collected $2 million something through some type of criminal revenue.
Yeah.
And that sets people off.
Having a private company have red light cameras and writing tickets.
It's guys, that's in my mind as an old dog, who's been around 28 years. That has been, in my mind, that's a major problem. When police start collecting cash, not for the fines that they're meant to be, to try to get people to stir them straight, but when they're collecting it to go back into the coffers, that becomes problematic.
Yeah.
I know politicians will be ready to hang me, but the reality of it is people are looking at that and going, wait a minute. It's one thing to take the money and it goes to court or some program. It's another thing to go back into the town's coffers. It's
worse than that because the ticket comes, no one wrote it, a robot wrote it. So that's a missed opportunity for the officer to engage that person. Mm-hmm. Second, I know my town. If there are not accidents in that intersection, you know, sometimes lights get run. It happens. But if it's not a dangerous intersection and it's just generating revenue, that's another negative thing. So you can have one ticket equal 4 or 5 negative points where the community's like, screw you, you know. And
hey, look at 2 years ago, I headed up north with my wife to go to New Hampshire. All right. And I drove up. It was late. We got up there about 11:30 at night. And we drove up, we got off the highway, and we're almost to where we're going to stay, and I get stopped on an OUI checkpoint. Right? A roadblock. I mean, it looked like something out of The Great Escape. So me being with the sense of humor I have, the police officer walks over and he looks at me and I go, come on, man. I said, please tell me. I said, we're in the state that claims live free or die and I'm getting stopped in a roadblock. What's going on? Of course, the young guy looks at me with a scowl and I start to chuckle. He goes, sir, can I see your license or registration? I said, sure. He says, have you had anything to drink tonight? I says, no, I haven't. I said, but I point to my wife and I go, but she's had a couple of glasses of wine before we started our drive up here. And he looks at me, he goes, are you a police officer by any chance? And I says, yeah, I am. Right. And he laughed and we joked around a little bit and he kicked me loose and sent me down the road. And at first I was laughing because it was kind of a fun little altercation. But then as I cruised down the road a little more, I was a little wound up about being stopped for nothing. And I'm a policeman. And I believe, I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, it's one thing to stop a guy swerving down the road speeding and I got him and he's drinking and I arrest him. It's another thing just to be stopped for no reason. And that goes back to your point. We might make 10 or 15 arrests that night, but how many hundreds of people drove through that are just as aggravated as a guy who's a cop? And I believe in law and order, but I'm angry about it. I'm upset about it. Not to the point I'm mad at the police. I'm mad at the situation. I'm like, it didn't feel right. Not in America. It doesn't feel right.
In my hometown, they'll do a DUI stop every now and then. They typically don't get anybody. My friends and I on a number of occasions have purposely driven through it, you know, and then when they say, let me see your license, the answer is no, you know, because this is what you've created. You create this negative thing. And
I saw one, I saw one recently, they just put a card up on the window. Yeah, I've been informed by my attorney not to open my window and not to talk. I don't want to talk to you or something. And they kick them loose. Look, this is it's not about, I'm trying to be very candid with your listeners because I don't think it helps to not be transparent.
Right.
And these are real feelings that a lot of guys have. Some guys will debate me and say, Freddie, what are you crazy? Look, I don't want drunk drivers on the road either. But at the same time, if I'm angry and I believe in taking drunks off the street, then what's it doing to the law-abiding people who are getting stopped? And are they getting aggravated? And are we alienating these folks from us? And the answer, in my mind, has to be yes, we are alienating some. and it's creating some of these problems that we're facing.
I do want to send a shout out to another police officer who's a friend of the show and been a former guest, Jeff Block, the Speedy Cop. He builds race cars out there in the East Coast. Even seen the upside down Camaro is one of his, and he also built this this plain fuselage. He put a race car inside of it and races. It's a street legal plain fuselage. He drives around, and it's incredible.
Well, and that's part of the community policing. He's in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And he is also, a tactical level. He's a mounted officer, so he gets to trample you with his horse if he has to. But he doesn't use his horse for that. More often than not, he uses his horse for photo opportunities with children.
Yeah.
And so he's a great face for policing because, he, like you said, the cuffing of assailants is a very small part of his job, a huge, huge part of his job, especially being in Washington, D.C. and on a horse, is interaction with the community. And he's the perfect guy for that because he's just he's just a lovable dude.
What I say is we need to develop full spectrum cops. We need to develop guys, especially patrol guys, who are capable of doing just what your friend there does. He's on the horse, or he's making cars, and he's doing talks, and he communicate with people, and in an instant, he can go and deal with something that's a potentially deadly encounter.
Yeah.
And we don't spend enough time prepping guys. We educate guys. What I mean by that is they come into the field educated now with high degrees, and we give them initial academy training, and that's all they get. They don't get any other specialized training. I mean, it's problematic. So what I spend a lot of my time doing is trying to develop programs where guys can do them in-house, like tactical decision games, decision-making exercises, after-action reviews, and taking advantage of downtime.
I want to close up with 3 things. Those 3 things are this. Cops out there, if you're listening, talk to people. Don't just talk to people about police work or about whatever, but talk to us about where you get a good burger, things like that. Citizens out there, same thing. If you're engaging a police officer who happens to be in the line at the coffee shop or wherever, hey man, he's just a guy going to work. He's got a difficult job and he just wants to get home. So talk to people. We all should just engage each other. And then finally, Fred, for you, I will say that we touched on a lot of general topics tonight, but you have an open invitation on the show. Man, we really appreciate what you're doing out there because it's important work.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Hey,
guys, thank you.
Everybody, ladies and gentlemen, listeners, Fred Leland.